Hello, role-playing people, and in this episode we're taking a quick glance at a few sorceries from Vampire the Masquerade. I've often heard players saying, "Oh my god, why couldn't White Wolf just have one system for magic? That would have made the game a lot easier." I mean, even if they're called Thaumaturgy, Assamite Sorcery, Setite Sorcery, Necromancy, or Koldunism, they do the same thing, right? To that I must briefly and bluntly answer, no. It's absolutely not the same thing, because these sorceries have not only been inspired by different magical practices and beliefs, but they function differently from each other within the fictional world of Vampire. To be a practitioner of magic is to be part of a culture and a community of practitioners, which often involves giving yourself to that art or craft wholeheartedly, involving it in all aspects of life or unlife. It's not something you casually perform on a Saturday night to have a few laughs with your friends. It's not something you can just dabble in for a few months out of curiosity, nor is it about discovering that the power was within your character all along and all they needed was to control their emotions better, as we often see in young adult media. Once a character is serious about pursuing such arts, they will become a part of that culture and will adopt certain behaviors. The practice will permeate them and will shape them moving forward even before they've achieved any real skill. So the initial investment and dedication really needs to be there. Not to mention, some of these practices are closely tied to the practitioner's path of morality, as we're about to see in a little while. So again, having access to sorceries should influence the character's behavior and morality. That is, unless their morality has already been shaped accordingly before their introduction to such practices. Sorcery in Vampire the Masquerade is undoubtedly a powerful thing, but it's not for everyone, since it can be difficult to grasp and requires constant exercise. In absence of serious dedication to such practices, the character cannot and should not have easy access to Thaumaturgy or Necromancy or any other sorcery. But what does easy access mean? One of the core principles of any sorcery is that observation and uninitiated, untrained imitation is not enough. You cannot learn the intricacies of these practices by simply watching it being done. It's quite naive to expect things to work like that, because as with any art or craft, there are different levels of initiation, each level reflecting the practitioner's understanding and dedication, the blood, sweat, and tears they've poured into achieving their current level of skill, but also their attunement to their practice in a very physical sense. The quickest example I can give you, you're looking at someone who is chanting while bending themselves into a pretzel. You can clearly see what the person is doing, but can you reproduce or imitate that? No, because your body isn't initiated or attuned to the requirements of the practice. You don't have the physicality or elasticity required to bend yourself in such a shape, and also you don't have a clear knowledge of the formula used, what exact words were uttered during the chant. Which language? What scale was the chant in? What was the precise sequence of notes used in that song, and what was the tempo? Didn't catch that just by observing? Of course you didn't, because every sorcery requires some type of initiation and relies on different principles. Thaumaturgy is not the same as necromancy, and it is not the same as Koldunism. How so? Well, thaumaturgy paths are the result of knowledge and the exertion of endlessly trained will channeled through vitae as a conduit. When it comes to rituals, the practitioner studies and probably memorizes very complex formulae that are to be performed in a precise, methodical manner. Do you have the right formula and all of the tools it requires, like foci and various other ritual objects? Can you keep up doing this perfectly precise ritual work for hours? Can you keep your mind from wandering away, even for 10 minutes. Without proper initiation, instruction, and practice, you probably can't. Let's do a brief exercise of the imagination regarding Giovanni Necromancy next, a practice which doesn't draw power from precise formulas or a will of iron, but rather from a systematic, repeated violation of moral constraints and taboos, more often than not, involving the dead. The necromancer draws power from the very energy of death, from the other side, the Shadowlands, purgatory, call it whatever you will. So it makes sense that the taboos they break often involve the dead, those poor spirits that the sorcerer gains authority over, and their earthly remains. To play a necromancer in Vampire means to spit in the face of all common sense, to endlessly seek an even lower tier of indecency. The bigger the interdiction defied and the greater the sin committed, the greater the effect of the sorcery. So I want you to imagine the following and ask yourself, is my character fine with or unaffected by stealing a body, making sure it is aged according to recipe, then ritualistically removing various extremities with a scalpel and saw, while effectively bathing in the stench of this corpse, the gases that make their way out of the bloating, rotting flesh, then fashioning a necklace from these extremities, toes, fingers, ears, and a few other things, before finally removing the eyes, boiling them in holy water and drinking that mixture down. I think it's needless to say, any character who preserves their humanity to even an average degree will have nothing to do with this practice. Next, Setite Sorcery. It's no wonder the practitioners are called lector priests, for you see their magic involves constant reaffirmation of belief in Set, indulging in all the rites and crimes that please this deity according to the Book of Going Forth by Night, something each priest inscribes for themselves, a personal copy which must be consecrated. In emulating the dismembering of Osiris, these priests make use of blasphemy shrines, ritual chambers in which the internal organs of the dead are removed and placed into the appropriate canopic jars in ceremonious manner, while using a wide array of tools, whether funerary or figurines, maybe vitae-laced sacramental beer, perhaps ointments and perfumes, and so on. Outside of this shrine, they make use of amulets and various other symbols of their loyalty to Set, the deity which they imitate. Unless your character is ready to accept the blessing and wisdom of Set, firmly positioning themselves on the other side, on the opposite side of any decency they might have known before, they cannot learn or practice this kind of sorcery. So, you see, in Vampire the Masquerade, most characters, especially those on the path of humanity, simply aren't ready or willing to engage in such practices, since they are unwilling to sacrifice everything they know to be good and moral, only to be able to study these ways, whether successfully or unsuccessfully, because the success of such endeavors depends entirely on the practitioner's ambition. This is why the Giovanni and Setites are independent, because their cultural practices which shape their disciplines and magics are abhorrent to any vampire who at least has the pretension of being humane. With the Tremere, the situation is quite a bit different, given how their powers come from will and formulae without any direct connection to their morality, though the book House of Tremere makes it clear that the origins of Thaumaturgy are also rooted in blood and agony, absolutely despicable behavior and ruthless ambition. Speaking of ambition, that brings us to the candidate's traits. I don't think any mentor would invest and teach sorcery to someone who isn't absolutely dedicated to the craft. We're not talking about, say, playing guitar. Playing guitar is quite an available skill to learn. There are plenty of good players out there, and if you pay for the classes, thus creating a fair exchange, bam, you can give it a go and see if this is something you might want to pursue further. With sorcery, characters don't really have that option because, like we've already seen, sorcery is ingrained in a clan's cultural/religious practice. Teaching it to someone is not an exchange, but rather a gesture of faith, the mentor showing enough confidence that the initiate will further the agenda of the clan and is worth teaching. Not to mention, some sorceries aren't even practiced by all members of the clan, but are instead reserved for the select and ambitious few. Not all Setites are lector priests, right? Not all Giovanni are powerful necromancers. They are all necromancers, mind you, but the degree of mastery depends entirely on their own willingness and ambition. Assamite sorcery, Dur-An-Ki, is reserved for a certain caste within the Assamite clan, while the La Sombra's abyss mysticism is reserved for those who elevate their obsession with the abyss to religious, mystical levels. In light of this, not only are sorceries very distinct practices from one another, and learning them would be quite difficult even for those who are initiated and already part of that culture, but the chances of them being taught to those outside of the clan are almost zero. This is something I just love about sorceries and in Vampire, the fact that they have societal, cultural, and moral connotations, not just arbitrary mechanical limitations and requirements. So for this reason, I think having separate systems for each sorcery and a set of rituals is great because it reflects the fact that each of them is a different practice. It functions according to different principles, using different tools, foci, channels, and what have you. Now, on a personal note, over the years I've seen countless players wanting to learn out-of-clan sorceries for their characters, protagonists like the Humanity 8 Toreador who wouldn't hurt a fly, but wants to learn at least one dot of necromancy from the Giovanni. My reaction to that has always been an invitation for them to learn a little bit about the principles of necromancy, and as soon as they read, they understood. Sorcery isn't just a skill or a tool. It's not like a magic wand you have on you. Flick it around a little bit and presto, get magic effect. It's not the type of discipline that simply develops the more you use it. It's not something you dabble in for a few months, but then forget about because you've lost interest. Instead, it's a way of life, or unlife in this case. It's something that the character learned because they were willing to sacrifice other things, their own humanity included. It's something their mentor bestowed upon them because it is a good investment for furthering the agenda of the clan, because the candidate showed devotion and ambition. It's tied to culture, morality, belief, the very way the character sees the world. The requirements of practicing, in this example, necromancy, don't come in the form of rules and systems, must have a minimum humanity of 3, but instead are presented in the descriptions of the powers themselves. The requirement is that your character has to ritualistically manipulate and often mutilate or wear and even engage in sexual activities with the remains of the dead. If your character meets that requirement, and they have a mentor who can teach them the rites, then yeah, necromancy is theirs. Sorcery in Vampire the Masquerade is less about the cool things magic can do, and more about how it's done, and what it means to the protagonist and their clan. In a future Vampire episode, since this is the old country, we will be taking an in-depth look at one of my favorite sorceries ever, Khuldunism. Take care, have fun, and don't forget to play.